Thank you to Centro Paulo Souza for inviting me to participate in this symposium. I'm a longtime admirer of your contributions to the COIL field and the spirit of collegiality that you've brought to every project and conversation I've been a part of with you over many years. For this presentation on cooperation in COIL, I'm drawing on my experience facilitating virtual exchange programs, overseeing COIL projects as a grant maker, funding research and evaluation, and now working for IVEC, the annual conference for the virtual exchange and COIL field. I think it's worth talking honestly about the challenges of COIL because they are inevitable, and pretending otherwise doesn't make them disappear. Overcoming challenges, particularly challenges in how we communicate and cooperate with people around the world, our international partners, is a big part of what makes this work fulfilling. So I'll talk about two hurdles and two bridges, the things that get in the way and what's helped to get past them, and maybe even how to avoid them before they happen. And then I'll offer a different word of encouragement. So let's talk about the hurdle with perspective taking. We often don't recognize how much our experiences and preferences, in other words, our point of view, differs from those of others, and how these differences shape our beliefs about how to design and conduct a COIL project. We each have different experiences and preferences for things like the technical platforms we use, language, when to have our sessions, how to structure our sessions, our learning goals, and how to do assessment, among many other things. Even the word COIL doesn't mean the same thing everywhere, a small but telling sign of how much our frame of reference shapes everything we do. The dominance of one partner's preferences is an especially significant challenge if one partner brings funding or other resources to the project and the other does not or has fewer resources. The instructor from the initiating institution, in other words, the partner who may have done the original outreach and suggested working together on a project, or the partner with more resources, they may treat their preferences as the default way things will work without realizing the number of assumptions that they're making or the effect that these assumptions will have on the shape of the project or on the experience of their partners. In a situation like this, the instructor's partner faces a choice. Do they go along? Do they gently voice a concern or a desire to find an alternative? Or do they push back more directly? These are just some of the things that a person might do when confronted with a partner who seems to be bringing their assumptions into a project. On one hand, pushing back can feel risky if you have fewer resources or if you have less experience. At the same rate, a partner who feels invisible or unheard can quietly disengage, which is something that we'll come back to later in this presentation. Building a bridge over this hurdle starts with recognizing that our way of seeing things is not the only way, and that it shouldn't become the default for setting up and carrying out a project. We need to ask ourselves regularly, how does this choice look from my partner's perspective, from their students' perspectives, from my students' perspectives? In practical terms, that means working with your partner on all aspects of the project, from the beginning of planning and throughout the whole process. Ask questions. Make room for your partner to express their thoughts. Make decisions together. Don't assume what comes to mind for you or what works for you is what you should do. When compromise is hard, for example, when there's no solution halfway between your and your partner's way of doing something, try taking turns accommodating each other's preferences. For example, if you've decided that you'll use the video conference platform that you and your students are most familiar with, try using the messaging app that your partner faculty member and their students are most familiar with for the communication between sessions. If live sessions will be at the time that works well for you and your students, for example, during your class time for the first live session that you do as part of your COIL project, schedule the next one at the time that works better for your partner and their students, maybe during their class time or another time that's convenient for them. Allocating more time to instructor lectures might be more familiar to one of the partners, and allocating time, conversely, to student-led group work might be comfortable for the other faculty member or other instructor. So it's important to recognize that the very act of taking turns is an important pattern and value to follow when designing and carrying out your project. If you're getting involved in a COIL project and your partner seems to be making assumptions based on their own preferences or experiences, what can or should you do? The approach I would take may make sense to me, but it may not be appropriate for you. I tend to be a relatively direct person who's comfortable expressing my thoughts in blunt terms, sometimes maybe too blunt. That may not be the approach that suits you, so it may not be the right thing to expect of yourself, even if you have a partner like me who might not be that offended if you tell them directly what you think. I encourage you to do what feels right for you, confident in the knowledge that your point of view matters just as much as your partner's. The success of the COIL experience hinges on whether the project feels fair and worthwhile to both of you. When a COIL collaboration feels difficult, one of the hardest parts is often not knowing why. This is something I've heard from many COIL practitioners, and I find it true in my remote work and in my work with international partners as well. Time zone differences are an obvious challenge, and they're often cited when people talk about the challenges of COIL. Technology problems, busy schedules, and competing priorities are also mentioned frequently. But we may find ourselves wondering whether the issue we're facing really is logistical or whether it's something else, something more complicated, or a combination of issues at the same time. We can spend a lot of time and energy wondering why we're struggling to solve a challenge, and that uncertainty can become its own hurdle. Once either partner feels like there has been a misunderstanding or something has gone wrong in the project, one or both partners may start to behave differently, for example, with a great deal of hesitation and caution, because they don't know what went wrong and they don't know what to do about it or how to talk about it. At this point, partners can struggle with differences in communication style, which might not have felt like much of a problem at the beginning of a project, or when things seem to be going smoothly, but take on clearer significance when challenges arise. For example, communication that may seem professional to one person may feel cold or uncaring to another. One person may like setting deadlines, the other may find it alienating to be given a deadline by their partner. It can be hard to interpret behavior by people that we've never met in person and only interact with online. We may not feel comfortable discussing our interpersonal dynamics, and there are several ways we can choose to not address our feelings about the situation. We can try simply to push through it and move ahead. We can pull back and become less engaged with our partner, or we can walk away without explaining ourselves and let the project fall apart. Unfortunately, these all happen in COIL. Challenges are compounded by the fact that there are different norms for communicating about disagreement or frustration in different cultural contexts, in addition to the differences in communication that are a matter of our personalities and individual experiences. People coming from a place where they're more direct might say, "This isn't working, let's fix it." Someone who is more indirect might take more time to respond, and they might signal their feelings with a carefully worded question rather than with a statement. We need to keep in mind that the intention of a comment or question may not be the same as the intention of the person who said it. Their intent may not be the same that we would have meant if we had said it ourselves. That's why I encourage you to talk about your expectations for how you and your partner will work together and how you'll communicate about challenges before issues arise. When and how do you want to communicate? What are some communication behaviors you seek or hope for in the people you work with? How do you want to bring up and try to resolve a challenge or disagreement? What are some of the things that you think might come up, things that you're concerned about at the start of the project? Talking about them early in the partnership can help you build a stronger relationship and might even help you navigate those issues later on. The same principles apply to working with the student participants in COIL, who also have their own varied ways of perceiving and relating to the people around them. Quiet students aren't necessarily disengaged. Maybe they're accustomed to deferring to instructors or waiting to be asked to offer their thoughts. Students who more readily express their opinions, including seemingly negative feedback, may not be acting inappropriately for the institutional context that they're used to. The goal is not to eliminate misunderstanding, but to make it as comfortable as possible to discuss areas of friction. Make it a part of your planning meetings with your partner instructor and your introductory sessions with your students to talk about the complexity and the learning opportunity you have as you navigate cooperation and collaboration across distance. I want to share a more general piece of advice about how to navigate international cooperation in COIL, and that is to find others on your campus who are involved in COIL as well, both instructors and administrators. Ask them questions and offer your observations and resources in return. If the COIL community on your campus is small, or maybe you're the only person you know who's involved in COIL on your campus, I encourage you to participate in the COIL networks that connect practitioners across institutions. Regional and global networks are emerging around the world, from LATAM COIL and BRAVE in the Western Hemisphere to UniCollaboration, UniCOIL, and the COILective NL in Europe, to AfriCOIL in Africa, and the JPN COIL Association in Japan. These networks are a bridge to stronger cooperation in COIL projects because they give practitioners a place to address issues they encounter, whether that's finding partners, drawing on frameworks for designing a COIL project, or developing strategies for overcoming challenges in international cooperation. For those who are just starting your COIL journey, or who haven't started yet but are considering it, the hurdles to international cooperation are real. Cross-cultural engagement is challenging, but identifying and working on these hurdles is part of the work, and often the most valuable part. Ignoring these challenges doesn't make them go away. Choosing not to address them just makes them persist and often get worse. When we use patience and curiosity to build a deeper understanding of others' points of view, we build relationships, practical, critical skills, and we also find fulfillment in having done something difficult, something that's truly worth doing. Thank you again for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to the live discussion.